Do you have a plan for long-term care? Have you even considered what it might cost you or your family if you do need long-term care? In this episode, we're going to talk about the odds of needing long-term care, types of care, what it can cost, and ways to pay for it, including whether self-funding makes sense for you. Whether you do or don't think you'll need it, you'll learn how to help yourself, your spouse, or your other family members facing chronic health issues.
It's easy to get lost on the way to retirement. Things like taxes, improper planning, and excessive market risk can all lead you astray from your goal of a successful and happy retirement. That's where Liz Whittaberry comes in. She's a holistic financial advisor and the founder of Best Path Advisors, and she can help guide you to a better financial path. This is Retire on Your Best Path with Liz Whittaberry.
Welcome to Retire on Your Best Path with Liz Whittaberry and myself here. Talk investing, finance once again. And of course, we're going to also talk about retirement and long-term care and Social Security and all the other things that we fold into these conversations that Liz and I have. And of course, as always, if you've got some questions along the way, especially for something like this week's topic, which is long-term care, which can definitely be a little daunting and whatnot, definitely make sure you're reaching out to a qualified professional like Liz, who is the founder and financial advisor at Best Path Advisors. And you can find her online at bestpathadvisors.com. Liz, how you doing? It's late January here for our late January episode, and it's absolutely frigid here, even in the South, right? It's just crazy how cold it's been lately.
Yeah, we've got in the low 30s right now and cold rain.
It was 14
but not quite
this
cold
morning.
enough to freeze.
It was 14 this morning in North Carolina.
Oh my goodness.
Crazy.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
We don't know what to do with that stuff. All of us Southerners are going, take it back to the north. We don't want it down here, right?
Yes. Yeah. I have a client in Tennessee who showed me a picture of a ton of snow and said, we don't normally get this.
Yeah. I mean, at least the snow, it's too cold
Yes.
to snow when it's 14, right? You know, in the 30s it'll snow,
right.
but 14, it's just, everything's just frozen. So crazy. But you doing all right this week? You hanging in there?
I am looking forward to having another good week and another good conversation today.
Absolutely.
And talking about something that's not necessarily our favorite thing to think about, but long-term care, because we do need to think about it.
Yeah, you know, that's a great point, right? Because it's happening to more and more of us. You and I were just talking about some personal stuff right before we got started in the health arena, right? And it's one of those things where it's like, it's just no fun, and it makes you kind of, I don't know, it just feels doomy and gloomy, and right, and it just kind of, it's hard to do, but we have to have these conversations. What is it, 7 out of every 10 people or something like that now are being, 2 out of every 3 get affected with some form of a long-term care event. So, first and foremost, I guess, what is it, right? It's not just the nursing home, right? I think that's what people think of, and that's what scares them.
Exactly. That's the first thing that comes to mind, but it really is a full-scale response to a change in somebody's ability to care for themselves and be independent. And so they've had some sort of an impairment and may need some help, and that is long-term care. There can be different kinds of impairments that cause that. It can be a physical impairment or a cognitive impairment.
Right.
And if it's important, if it's physical, to understand that could be just an acute impairment where you're going to have a full recovery. You broke a hip, you're going to get surgery, you're going to have a full recovery. That is not long-term care.
Mm-hmm.
That's a medical issue.
Right.
Chronic impairment, where you've had an accident, an illness, or you have dementia, where there's no recovery expected and you can't do certain things to be independent, that's where long-term care comes in.
I imagine some of those can blend over too, right?
Yes.
Like you could have, like I've had back surgery and I could see that becoming a chronic impairment as I age, that kind of thing. But, what are the chances? Again, I kind of touched on that a little bit of needing long-term care. It's obviously growing pretty exponentially year over year, it seems like.
And I think the reason it's growing is we're living longer.
True.
And so the longer we live, it becomes greater chance of having a long-term care need. The older we are, the longer we live. The studies right now are saying that there is more than a 50% chance that someone that's turned 65 is going to eventually need some kind of long-term care. Mm-hmm. And women will have a greater need. Women have a higher average. So currently, the stats say men need 2.2 years of care on average. Women need 3.7 years of care on average, so almost double. But that's just an average, and some people aren't going to need it, and other people are going to have a need for a much longer period of time. I had one lady whose father needed long-term care, and they spent a little bit of time figuring that out. And by the time he got to assisted living, he was there for less than a year. Another lady whose mom needed long-term care and had more of the cognitive issues, and she was in a facility for 18 years.
Wow. Yeah.
So there can be a big difference, and those averages are very misleading. You have to think about your health, your family history, how long you might live, and what that could look like in your own situation.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll touch on some of this, but obviously that cognitive care, dementia, things of that nature, those are longer events and obviously way more costly as well, right? So certainly planning in that regard is crucial. So when we say somebody does need LTC, long-term care, what kinds of typical things are we kind of seeing in this arena? Because it's not dementia for every person, obviously.
Correct. Typically, when we're talking about long-term care, we're talking about people not being able to do some of the activities of daily living. And
it's like six of them, right? Isn't it like six of them?
Yeah, there's 6 essential skills to live independently. That is being able to bathe, where you can maintain your hygiene, continence, having complete control of bowels and bladder, being able to get dressed independently, being able to get out of bed in the morning or get in and out of chairs and move from one place to another without help, being able to feed yourself. And that doesn't mean fixing your food. That means being able to actually get the food from the plate to your mouth, chew it and swallow it.
Okay.
And then toileting, being able to get on and off the toilet and clean yourself. Those are the 6 things that are necessary to live independently. And if you need help with that, then you've got to have some help at home or help in a facility. There are some other, what we call instrumental activities of daily living that you may notice maybe a parent isn't handling as well. They're really needed to be able to manage your own affairs. So doing your own house cleaning, managing your money, paying your bills, managing your medications, being sure to take them on time.
Good point.
Preparing meals, shopping for groceries, getting to and from a store, being able to drive or use the telephone or use the computer. These things are important for being able to manage your own affairs, but a lot of times people can get help much easier for those at home. If they need it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my mom's 83 or going on 83, and she can pretty much do, just about everything in that, the instrumental activities you just listed there. It starts to get a little harder for her to do the laundry, bending over, things of that nature, but she still can do it, right? So there's a lot of those, it starts to slip on us a little bit, but I think that's a great point is understanding the differences between those 2 different kinds of categories there. What kind of help is needed under some of these different things, like obviously we talked a little bit about, cognitive, for example.
Right. And so if you have a cognitive impairment, then you need some sort of supervision so that you're not a danger to yourself or others.
Right.
And a long time ago, I had a client whose father had developed some sort of dementia. And he would get up, he was in his 80s, he would get up in the morning, get dressed, and get his briefcase packed, get his lunch packed, and leave the house to go to work. Because in his mind, he was at a totally different phase in life. But he would walk a few blocks down and knock on a door and try to get into a house, insisting that he needed to get in there and go to work. I had another client who developed Alzheimer's kind of youngish, in his late 60s, and he would get lost. And so he would go to play golf and then wouldn't be able to find his way home. So that became a little bit dangerous. The more physical needs, somebody might need some standby assistance or some hands-on assistance if somebody's at risk of falling or, can't do certain things for themselves physically anymore. They may need some standby or hands-on assistance, a person there to help at those points in time.
Yeah, and I think, obviously it's wild, isn't it? Like how vast the range can be, right? You were just talking about that one gentleman being in his 60s and starting to have trouble remembering where he was at and things of that nature. And, I'm 52 and I wonder what, will that happen to me and when it might? And then I look at my mom and she's 82, 83. She doesn't have any of those signs, so you just never know. Right. So
Yeah.
you're certainly going
Yeah.
to have to, address these things and have these conversations. And again, that's the hard part often is just kind of looking mortality, I suppose, in the eye and saying, okay, I need to talk about this stuff, And so then we start wondering, okay, what if it does happen? Well, if it does, where do I turn to get help? What are some things to look at? Obviously, we think of maybe the formal kinds of things.
Yes. And to circle back to your first point, I think it's important to do the things to keep ourselves healthy,
Yeah,
both physically and mentally.
got to keep moving too, right?
Uh, keep moving, keep your brain active, do everything you can to prevent needing this in the future. But sometimes we can't prevent even doing the very best. There are very healthy people that end up with issues, and we just don't know. So it's important to have an idea of, well, if that happens to me, what would I want, and
Mm-hmm.
where would I want that? So formal care comes about in having, paying somebody that it's their job to provide this kind of care. And you can get formal care at home, or you can get formal care in an adult daycare center or assisted living or a nursing home or the continuing care retirement communities where you can move up from one level to the next as things change. And there are even organizations that help people figure this out. That's their job. They know the places in your area and the levels of service. And so you can find an organization that can give some input on that if you need to. The more common care, I think, is the informal care. And there's a lot of that. Spouses caring for the other spouse,
Mm-hmm.
maybe kids helping parents or friends stepping in. And so there's a lot of that goes unnoticed. And that's really the first line of care that's provided, and may even continue, just really depends on what a person's situation is. But there's both of those, formal care and informal care.
Yeah, and I think the informal, right, is the place we all try to look at first. We feel like it's going to obviously, first and foremost, let's just be honest, a cheaper option, right, than
Right.
looking at some of this stuff. And there's also kind of a sweet nobility in some of that, where we're like, yeah, we're just going to take care of each other, as for example, as a married couple. But the reality becomes that it becomes very, very hard to do. It's very, very physically taxing, emotionally taxing. So
Yes.
that can certainly run a very short course as well. So then we do need to think about the financials, right? So let's talk about what it's going to cost.
Yeah, and going back to the cost of the informal care,
Mm-hmm.
even though it doesn't cost money, it costs time
Yeah.
for the person. And so if kids are doing that, they may have to take time off of work, or it
Right.
may be unpaid leave. They may resign to help care for parents. They may not get promotions that they were going to get because they're just not as available to the job.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a decision that they have to make. They may move to be closer to family, closer to mom, closer to dad. And so away from their friends and their own other loved ones. So that needs to be thought about as you're thinking about what might it look like for yourself and for your
Mm.
own family. You,
Right.
you do need to think about that. Formal care can be very expensive. And there is an online website, the Genworth Long-Term Care Calculator. If you Google that, you can put in your state, you can even put in your zip. It'll narrow into the biggest city close to you and tell you what does it cost for these kind of services. They do an annual study and update that regularly. So
And
just
that
looking at national averages.
let me real fast. Sorry, Liz. Let me put that out there again for folks. That was Genworth Long Term Care Calculator.
Yes. And Genworth is a company that has offered long-term care insurance over the years. And they do this really good in-depth study and have for a very long time,
Okay.
for a decade or more.
Very cool. All right. So
Yeah.
so are the some of the national averages you were going to say?
Yeah, and you can see these on their website. So for getting somebody to come into your home just 4 hours a day, 3 days a week, that's going to be about $1,300 a month. Having somebody go to adult daycare, and a lot of times people will do that if they're working. Mom or dad can go to adult daycare and come back home in the evening. That'll be about $1,600 a month. Assisted living for one bedroom room averages about $4,500 a month. And then when you get to the nursing home, the semi-private room is about 7,800 a
Wow.
month. The private room is about 8,900. So we're going on almost 9,000 a month for a private room. And then if you need memory care, it gets to be a lot more expensive. I've seen that be getting close to 15 to 20,000 a month for memory care.
Yeah, and people hear that, right, and their brain shuts down, right? They hear
Yeah.
that and they go, "There's no way. I mean, there's no way. I don't even make $15,000 a month. How am I going to pay for that?" You know.
Right.
So
Yes.
what are we looking at?
There's really only three ways that you can pay for long-term care. You can get some government help if you qualify, or you can self-pay out of your own assets, or if you have insurance, you can have insurance that helps pay for that. And government help is not available to very many people. Medicare doesn't cover this kind of care. It covers the acute care where there's an expectation that you're going to get well.
Right.
It does not cover custodial care where it's ongoing. So they don't cover long-term care.
They have kind of a finite thing, right? There's like an end date. You're going to
Yes.
heal by such and such or whatever.
Yeah, they'll cover 100 days in a place where you need some rehab. And if you need to go on into custodial care ongoing, then you're going to have to switch over to paying in a different way. There is Medicaid and the veterans. Those will pay for some expenses if you qualify, but with Medicaid, you've got to be destitute.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not really an option for most people. Most people are going to need to self-pay or buy some insurance. And when you're thinking about that, and I talk to a lot of people who want to self-pay and other people who do want some insurance, and it really has a lot to do with their attitude towards risk and their family history. They're thinking through the different things. So you want to take your own situation and start with your retirement plan and then run a scenario where one or both of you need long-term care and just see what does that look like. If we needed the highest level cost for a period of time, how does that impact our assets and what we're leaving at the end? Do we still leave money at the end or do we run out? And by looking at that, then you can know, could I self-fund if I wanted to, or do I really need to cover this gap? Is there a gap that I should consider covering with some sort of insurance? And that's going to be very different for each person. Some people will look at their house as a place to pull money.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Right.
Yeah, we have a lot of equity tied up in homes. And most days these days, kids aren't taking the home and living in the home that the parents had. It gets sold.
Right, right.
And so that home equity could be used either by selling the house and moving into a facility or taking a reverse mortgage out against it and using that equity to cover the cost of care. So that's one backup plan. But if if that's still not enough to cover the cost of long-term care, then it would be wise to at least consider what would insurance cost and can I get some insurance to cover the gap just to be
Right.
Protected?
Yeah, I mean, clearly that makes sense, and that's a great way of looking at that, right? I mean, we start thinking about the self-funding ways, and we think, oh, geez, how are we going to go through this? And, the house is a good example. So if we are talking about, all right, now let's eyeball some insurance here, what are some of the insurance options that they'll pay for as far as long-term care?
There's really now three basic types of insurance. And in the past, we only had the traditional long-term care insurance, which is really like health insurance or property and casualty insurance, where you pay a premium ongoing. That premium can go up and you have a certain amount of benefits. The traditional long-term care insurance is still available. Some people still buy that, but a lot of people are now going the route of either getting a hybrid long-term care insurance policy. So that's a life insurance policy that has the ability to use some or all of the death benefit for long-term care.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't use it for long-term care, then you still have this death benefit that goes to your family when you pass away. So it's giving you a combination, and it improves upon the fact that, that traditional long-term care is usually use it or lose it, just like with your fire insurance, use it or lose it. Well, you're happy you didn't have a fire and you didn't use it, but with this hybrid long-term care insurance, if you don't use it, then there's a death benefit that can go to your family. And so you don't end up losing all the money that you put into the policy. Another option is an annuity, and there are annuities that have some long-term care benefits built into them. It's not as much as a long-term care policy because they don't have underwriting or they have very minimal underwriting. And this allows people that either don't want to spend the full amount on a life insurance or long-term care policy, or they might have some health issues and not be able to qualify for those other options. They can get, use an annuity, use a fund of money that's just kind of sitting there that they're not going to be using for income, and move that over to an annuity that would have some sort of long-term care benefits on it. So there's lots of options.
It sounds like it's worthwhile to at least have that conversation with your advisor.
Yeah, I think so. Just to know what are your options and do it while you're younger rather than wait. Occasionally I'll have people that hit, like age 79 and they say, oh, I should think about long-term care. Well, it gets to be very expensive and hard to qualify the older you are.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
So it's important to look at that earlier. And I have relationships with some companies that specialize in this. So I can get really good information, analysis, research, what's the best. They stay up on what companies are doing and who has got the best rates and all of those things.
I gotcha. Okay. And of course, as always, if you need some help with that, definitely make sure you reach out to Liz and have a conversation with her at bestpathadvisors.com. I know we're getting a little bit long in the tooth on this episode here. Any kind of final points that you'd like to make as far as things that just to think about before we go?
Yeah, I'll just quickly say it's important to start the conversation early, even before you need to have the conversation. Have the conversation with parents, have the conversation with your children. With your parents, you want to be watching their activities of daily living, those instrumental activities of daily living, and just watch for gaps and think through how you can help them fill those gaps to stay independent as long as possible, but also be ready to make changes when they need to make changes and be talking about that as you go so that it's a very gentle and empathetic process for your parent to keep them as safe as possible. And then for yourself, you've got to think about the ways that you can make it easy on your other family members if something happens to you. And that may mean having, some insurance, or you need to know how it's going to be paid for so that people don't stress over that. You need to know what kind of care you're going to want so people don't stress over, well, what would you want? And have some of those conversations so that everybody's just on the same page and they know, okay, here's what dad would want. Here's what mom would want. And I know I'm doing the right thing and I'm honoring their wishes. And that just takes a whole load of pressure off of your kids.
Yeah, it's a great point, right? If we start having these conversations with ourselves, it makes it easier, for our kids to move forward with that process. And just like if we're thinking about our senior parents, like mine, for example, we haven't had a lot of those conversations. So unfortunately, now that she's older, right, we're kind of there. So if you find yourself in that same boat, don't pass that forward, so to speak, to your own kids. Start having those chats now. Start thinking about what it is that you might need or want, and definitely reach out to a qualified professional like Liz. So, good stuff, Liz. Obviously, this is a very big topic that we could go on and on, but we won't try to go too much longer here. So any kind of final thoughts or, best the best path thing for people to take is just reach out to somebody, right?
Yeah. And I would say the thing that puts you on your best path is having those conversations as early as possible before you need to have them. Well, there's no pressure or stress in the conversation. It's just a conversation.
Yep. And to your point, too, it also helps on the money side, right? The sooner we can get some of these things taken care of. So, folks, that's going to do it this week for our conversation on Long-Term Care 101. Obviously, a very hefty, very weighty conversation. Please make sure that you're reaching out and talking to your loved ones, but also include your financial professional in that. And if you don't have one, again, of course, reach out to Liz and get started with a conversation with her. And you can find her online at bestpathadvisors.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify or Google, YouTube platforms. Liz has a YouTube channel as well. She's got some great video content on there as well. And you can find all of that at bestpathadvisors.com. Liz, thanks for hanging out. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Mark. I enjoyed it.
As always, I'll catch you next time right here on Retire on Your Best Path.
The preceding program is sponsored by Best Path Advisors, which is solely responsible for its content. Securities offered through J.W. Cole Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through J.W. Cole Advisors. Best Path Advisors, J.W. Cole Financial, and J.W. Cole Advisors are unaffiliated entities. The opinions expressed by Liz Whitberry should not be construed as specific tax, legal, or investment advice, nor as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Neither J.W. Cole Financial nor its representatives provide legal, tax, or accounting advice. Persons who provide such advice do so in a capacity other than as a registered representative of J.W. Cole. Investing is subject to risks, including the loss of principal. Due to volatility within the markets mentioned, opinions are subject to change without notice. Information is based on sources believed to be reliable, however, their accuracy or completeness cannot be guaranteed.